Today on The World Today, Chinese lawmakers adopt the controversial security law for Hong Kong and international community reacts. Meanwhile, the Chinese study shows a new flu virus found in pigs has become more infectious to humans and harbors a potential to become a pandemic virus. Plus, thousands crowd the streets of Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa to say goodbye to popular singer who was assassinated on Monday. A warm welcome to the program. Today, I'm Amarachi Ubani. So we begin in China and the reactions to the country's parliament passing the controversial security law, giving it new powers over Hong Kong. The law has been signed by President Xi Jinping and is being placed in Hong Kong's mini-constitution, criminalizing sedition and effectively curtailing protests. Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, says the law fills a gaping hole in the region's national security. And we'll have that report in a moment. But what is in the new law? It makes criminal any act of secession, subversion of the central government, terrorism and collusion with foreign or external forces. Plus, a new office in Hong Kong would deal with national security cases, but would also have other powers, such as overseeing education about national security in Hong Kong schools. The City of Hong Kong will also have to establish its own National Security Commission to enforce the laws, with a Beijing-appointed advisor, of course. And Hong Kong's chief executive will have the power to appoint judges to hear national security cases, a move which has raised fears about judicial independence. And most importantly, Beijing will have power over how the law should be interpreted. If the law conflicts with any Hong Kong law, the Beijing law takes priority. The Nigerian director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Lagos, Professor Chimdi Maduagwu, joins us now on the program. He's on the telephone from Yaba. Professor Maduagwu, thank you for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you, Amarachi.
Why do you think that China feels the need to impose this law, despite seeing how controversial it is for everyone?
Well, Hong Kong has been quite controversial.
We do seem to be having problems with connecting with Professor Maduagwu. We'll try to reconnect with him, and then we'll have, him on the program. But back to the story now, the new law, the security law, the controversial law that has erupted protests in Hong Kong has been passed and signed by President Xi Jinping in China and the parliament. So it criminalizes sedition and effectively curtails protests. The chief executive of Hong Kong says the law fills a gaping hole in the region's national security.
Several world powers are expressing their frustrations after China passed a controversial security law, giving it powers over Hong Kong. Chinese President Xi Jinping signed a law criminalizing sedition and restricting protest, which will now be part of Hong Kong's mini-constitution. In response, several prominent activists have stepped down from their groups in what they're calling the darkest days in Hong Kong.
After being named by People's Daily, newspaper under communist regime several times, I will probably be the prime target of the new law. But what makes me fear is not my potential imprisonment, but the gloomy fact that the new law will be the threat over the city's future and not only my personal life. Journalists, human rights groups, NGOs, and expats may fall prey to the new law since all dissenting voice can be charged with inciting subversion, like the situation in mainland China.
Protesters are not alone in their disappointment of the new Hong Kong security law, as Taiwan's president expresses her discontent in a press briefing.
Mainland China once promised Hong Kong that they wouldn't change its system for 50 years. The passing of the national security law indeed has made this promise discounted. We feel very disappointed. This also proves that one country, two systems doesn't work.
The European Union has also interjected with their own condemnation, calling China's actions deplorable.
This law risks seriously undermining the high degree of autonomy of Hong Kong and having a detrimental effect on the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law, and we deplore this decision.
Despite the negative backlash, Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, defended the law, even saying it filled the gaping hole in national security.
The legislation will not undermine one country, two systems, and Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. Hong Kong is a free and diversified society. We respect differences in opinion and strive on reaching consensus. But the one country principle is non-negotiable and could not be compromised, as without one country, two systems will stand on shaky ground and Hong Kong's stability and prosperity will be at risk.
Amidst the global feedback on their new security law, China says it will take retaliatory measures in response to the United States' decision to start eliminating Hong Kong's special status under U.S. law.
中国政府维护国家主权、安全、发展利益的决心。
Intimidation will never work on China. The U.S. wants to use these so-called sanctions to obstruct China's legislation process to safeguard national security in Hong Kong. This attempt has no chance of success.
The law comes as a response to last year's often violent pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong and aims to tackle subversion, terrorism, separatism, and collusion with foreign forces. But opponents of the law say that the right to protest and an independent and strong judiciary are at risk.
We have Professor Chimdi Madagu back on the line. He's the Nigerian director of the Confucius Institute at the University of Lagos. Professor Madagu, thank you for staying with us. Why do you think that China feels the need to impose this law, despite seeing how controversial it is and all the reactions to it? Our apologies again. We seem to have lost him again. But let's stay in China for a bit as floods inundate parts of the eastern and southwestern parts, trapping residents and destroying croplands. Overnight rain hit many areas of Kuzhou City, east of Zhejiang province, from Monday night until this morning. With the river surging up in the city's Kecheng district, an excavator driver was stranded in the middle of the flooded river, over 30 meters away from the bank. Unable to approach the trapped driver in the raging flood, the firefighters could only rescue him by using a crane. The only road out of Zutang village in Changshan County was totally submerged, so many villagers were also trapped inside their houses. The firefighters used rubber boats to transfer all of them to safety as of this morning. At least 753 people have been relocated in Changshan County. In the meantime, Chinese scientists are saying there could be another pandemic up ahead as they found a new flu virus in Chinese pigs, which has become infectious to humans, so would need to be watched closely. Experts, however, say there is no imminent threat of this virus. The team of Chinese researchers looked at influenza viruses found in pigs from 2011 to 2018 and found a G4 strain of H1N1 that has all the essential hallmarks of a candidate pandemic virus. Pig farm workers also showed elevated levels of the virus in their blood. The authorities say that close monitoring in human populations, especially the workers in the swine industry, should be urgently implemented. The study highlights the risk of viruses crossing the species barrier into humans, especially in densely populated regions in China, where millions live in close proximity to farms, breeding facilities, slaughterhouses, and wet markets. The current coronavirus sweep in the world is believed to have originated in horseshoe bats in southwest China and could have spread to humans via seafood markets in the central city of Wuhan, where the virus was first identified. Speaking of the coronavirus, that's the reason the EU is allowing only citizens from 15 countries back in and excluding others. They are countries the EU considers safe. Who made the list? Being Canada, Morocco, Australia, Algeria, Georgia, Japan, Montenegro, New Zealand, Rwanda, Serbia, South Korea, Thailand, Tunisia, and Uruguay. The UK and 4 other non-EU states, Switzerland, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, are automatically included as safe. Who is not on the list is Nigeria, for one, nor any other country in West or Central Africa, the United States, Brazil, and Russia, and quite interestingly, China. But that is subject to a reciprocal agreement. EU officials say the decision was based on a number of scientific factors, such as ensuring that the COVID-19 infection rate in the country is low enough. That's where nations have fewer than 16 in every 100,000 infected. Also, that there is downward trend of cases and that social distancing measures are at a sufficient level. And we'll be looking at those global figures in a bit. But Russian President Vladimir Putin has been appealing to Russians to vote for a list of constitutional amendments that would let him stay in office up until 2036. Standing before a new statue commemorating the efforts of Soviet soldiers during the Second World War on the day before voting ends, President Putin appealed to ordinary Russians' patriotism and their desire for stability, without mentioning the stark political implications that the vote would have by resetting term limits and allowing him to seek re-election twice more as president. Russia's constitutional vote, an ad hoc plebiscite that is not quite a referendum, has seen a massive get-out-of-the-vote effort. Local governments have enticed voters with raffles and cash prizes just to increase the turnout at the polls. But a state-owned pollster has already released what many consider a controversial exit poll, claiming that 76% of the voters supported the amendments. The Kremlin is seen to have a high turnout in the votes, which culminates on Wednesday to show that President Putin and his platform enjoy broad support. Polish President Andrzej Duda has won the most votes in the first round of the 2020 presidential elections. According to the final results released by the country's electoral commission, the incumbent president supported the ruling Law and Justice Party, won 43.5% of the votes in the first round election. His closest opponent, Rafał Trzaskowski, who you see there, the mayor of Warsaw, and a member of the Civic Platform, came second with 30.46% of votes. None of the other 8 candidates won more than 10% of the vote. The U.S.-Iran envoy Brian Hook says the UN arms embargo on Iran will not expire. He was saying this in Jerusalem, having made a similar remark in Saudi Arabia. He said letting the ban expire would allow Tehran to further arm its proxies and destabilize the region. Iran denies these accusations, saying instead some of its political opponents in the region are engaged in destabilization efforts.
This is a threat to Israel's security. And so the United States and Israel, working together, as we have for many decades, will ensure that one way or another, the arms embargo will not expire and it will be extended.
The Iranian Revolutionary Guards, led by the arch-terrorist Qasem Soleimani, launched a proxy war against the United States forces and allies in the region, and I can say the plan failed. It failed because the United States refused to be intimidated, and in fact, you took important and courageous decisions to take out Soleimani.
When we come back after the break on The World Today, we'll take other stories around the globe. Plus, you don't want to miss this one. The future of meat is here. You're looking at an Israeli status plan to launch what we could be looking at, a 3D printer to produce plant-based steak, the making real beef. This is what we could be eating in the future. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Thousands have taken to the streets of Addis Ababa to escort the body of popular protest singer Hakalu Hundessa to his home of Ambo. Hakalu, an Oromo musician popular for his protest songs, was assassinated late Monday. Addis Ababa City Police Commissioner Getu Argo told state media that some suspects have been detained following the incident. Young people enraged by the killing burned tires and chanted slogans during the demonstrations. In a display of anger from the Prime Minister's own Oromo ethnic community, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has expressed his condolences, promising an investigation and asking the public to remain calm. In a message that he posted on Twitter, Nkala was a former political prisoner. He rose to prominence during the prolonged anti-government protests which propelled Prime Minister Abiy into office in 2018. But the rise in political activism has also led to an increase in unrest in the country. That's made up of more than 80 ethnic groups. Mr. Abiy's rule has been frequently challenged by local power brokers, demanding more access to land, power, and of course, resources. In Belgium, King Philippe expressed a deep regret for the suffering and humiliation inflicted on the Democratic Republic of Congo during its 75-year period under Belgian rule. It's the first time an expression of regret for Belgium's colonial past has been made by a reigning monarch. But it came in a letter to DRC President Félix Tshisekedi to mark the 60th anniversary of the country's independence. For some in Brussels, however, the king's words did not suffice, and some continue to ask the statues of former Belgian King Leopold II be removed from public space. The DRC achieved independence in 1960 after the Central African country had been a Belgian colony for 52 years. Belgium has long struggled to come to terms with its colonial past and history with the Congo. During a ceremony commemorating the anniversary, Prime Minister Sophie Wilms described its troubled history as a past marked with inequality and violence towards the Congolese. Statues of Leopold, whose troops killed and maimed millions of people in Congo, have been defaced or removed in Belgium after global anti-racism protests sparked by the police killing of a black American, George Floyd, in the United States, swept across Europe and the rest of the world. A second pre-trial hearing for the case of George Floyd, the African-American who died after white police officer Derek Chauvin pressed his knee on his neck, has held in the U.S. city of Minneapolis. Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer, was fired and arrested after Floyd's death. He was charged with second-degree murder on top of the third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter charges. 3 other former police officers involved in Floyd's death have also been fired and jailed, facing the charge of aiding and abetting murder. On Monday, Chauvin attended the 20 minutes or so court hearing via video link, while 3 other ex-officers appeared in person in court. Family members of George Floyd also attended the hearing. The next will be held on September 11, and the tentative trial date will be March 8, 2021, for the 4 former police officers.
Guilty. We see all of this, but this has to be proven. Everybody has to have a free trial, and I understand that. So you have to respect the system. So going through the process is frustrating, and hoping for justice, because we don't know. So I think my nephew case is going to be a fight. This is going to be a heavy fight. I can see it right away. It's going to be a fight.
Let's take a look at the global updates on the coronavirus. The states in the United States are still reconsidering the ease of lockdown measures. New York is requiring 8 more states to self-quarantine for 14 days when they come to the state. Meanwhile, cases requiring hospital admissions are going up across the country. Now, around the world, cases are spiking in Latin America. Brazil still taking the cake on this one. India, and of course, in South Africa.
Invest and to come up with...
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has unveiled a post-lockdown recovery plan to rebuild the UK economy following the pandemic crisis. Johnson says it is a new deal echoing U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's 1929 post-Great Depression program. Meanwhile, a new lockdown has been imposed in Leicester following a recent surge in infections. The UK now has a total of 313,470 cases and a death toll of 43,660. In Sweden, an app that keeps track of pub goers has been developed as pubs set to reopen across the UK on July 4th. Bar owners will need to carefully manage how many people are in their premises, and this app is setting out to help.
We realised that it would be difficult for pubs, restaurants or any tourism business to be able to manage the amount of people with the coronavirus. So we built an app so that businesses could say how many people they could have on their premises, and then people could book up those places either online or using their phone on a QR code.
The idea that we should open our border in this environment...
Over in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced borders will remain closed despite the European Union allowing residents from the country to travel within its borders. Ardern also said that New Zealand will use virtual digital platforms to host the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group Summit in 2021, adding that the pandemic was far from over. In the U.S., more states are deciding to halt easing lockdown measures amid a surge of infections. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered bars to close in several counties as the Golden State saw an alarming record single-day surge, putting Los Angeles County's cases over 100,000. Meanwhile, some leading Republican lawmakers have begun advocating for face masks, including Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, a rare split from President Trump, who has mostly resisted wearing a mask. In Mexico City, shops and restaurants are set to reopen with new safety measures and limitations, after the local government announced the relaxation of lockdown in Mexico's capital. Mexico's health ministry reported 4,050 new confirmed cases of coronavirus infections on Sunday, June 28th, and 267 additional fatalities, bringing the total number in the country to 216,852 cases and 26,648 deaths.
Oh, we close the program with a pretty interesting story. Israeli startup redefined meat plants to launch 3D printers to produce plant-based steak that mimics the real beef next year in a bid to win a slice of the fast-growing alternative meat market. Plant-based meat products are becoming increasingly popular, with consumers worried about animal welfare and the environment. I know. Based in Rehovot, south of Tel Aviv, Redefined Meat will first market test all its steak at high-end restaurants later this year before rolling out its industrial-scale 3D printers to meat distributors in 2021. So look out, could be eating a 3D steak pretty soon, at least by the end of this year. Does it look like real beef? I don't know. I can't tell. But if it's not the real thing, it really is not the real thing. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.